Being an au pair can sound like a dream, living in another country, getting free room and board, and becoming part of a family. But not every family is what they seem, and sometimes the things you take care of aren't children at all. These are 4 disturbing true au pair horror stories, and by the end, you may think twice before stepping into someone else's home. Before we begin, if you enjoy eerie, real-life horror stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring you more chilling tales. Now let's dive in. Samantha was 22 when she left her small town in Canada to work as an au pair in France. It was an opportunity she couldn't resist: live-in accommodations, good pay, and the chance to immerse herself in a new culture. The family was wealthy. Their home, a grand old estate just outside Paris, with high ceilings, antique furnishings, and a sprawling garden that looked like something out of a fairy tale. Their 2-year-old son, Jules, was a quiet child. Too quiet. He rarely cried, rarely laughed, and spoke even less. But he watched, always watching with those big, unblinking eyes. At first, the nights were peaceful. The routine was simple: dinner, bath time, bedtime stories, lights out. Samantha would retire to her room, keeping the baby monitor beside her pillow just in case. But on the 3rd night, just past midnight, the monitor crackled to life. A whisper. Not the incoherent babble of a toddler, but something slow, deliberate. Words she couldn't quite make out. Samantha sat up, her heart hammering. She reached for the monitor, the small screen glowing faintly in the dark. Jules's crib was empty. Her breath caught in her throat. She threw off the covers and rushed to his room, expecting the worst. But when she pushed open the door, there he was, tucked under the covers, chest rising and falling in deep sleep. Yet the whispering continued. She lifted the monitor to her ear. The voice was still there, not a child's, a man's, low, murmuring in a language she didn't understand. Then laughter, deep, raspy, too close. She spun around. The room was empty. The next morning, she told the parents. They barely reacted, exchanging a quick glance before dismissing her concerns. Old house, old wiring, interference from other monitors in the neighborhood. That explanation didn't sit right with her. There were no nearby houses. The estate was surrounded by acres of private land. The following night, she stayed awake longer, staring at the ceiling, listening for any sign of noise. Hours passed in silence. Maybe it had been a fluke. Maybe she was just tired. Then, static. She bolted upright and grabbed the monitor. On the screen, Jules was awake, standing in his crib. His head was slightly tilted, his wide eyes locked onto the camera. A shadow moved behind him. Not the flicker of tree branches through the window, not a trick of the light. This was a solid, shifting shape, taller than the crib. Something that shouldn't have been there. And then Jules smiled. The shadow loomed closer, stretching across the crib, swallowing the dim glow of the nightlight. Samantha's hands trembled as she clutched the monitor. Then the screen went black. She didn't wait for morning. By dawn, she was packed and gone, leaving behind her salary, her belongings, everything. She never spoke to the family again, never found out what lurked in that house. But sometimes, late at night, she swore she could still hear the whispering and the laughter. When Rachel accepted a job as a live-in English tutor in a remote German village, she expected a quiet, uneventful stay. The countryside was peaceful, the air crisp, and the family, Herr and Frau Meyer, and their 2 young children, were kind, if a bit reserved. The house was massive, old, the kind of place with creaky wooden floors and dimly lit corridors, but it was beautiful in its own eerie way. There was only one rule. The door at the end of the hall, Frau Meyer said the day Rachel arrived, her smile polite but firm. It must stay locked, always. Rachel glanced down the long hallway. The door was plain, unremarkable, with an old brass handle and a heavy keyhole. Nothing about it seemed particularly threatening. She nodded. Of course. At first, she didn't think much of it. Every home had its quirks. But as the days passed, she started to notice things. At night, when the house was still, she would hear it. Soft shuffling, a faint scratching. Sometimes the floorboards creaked as if someone was shifting their weight just behind the locked door. Then came the whispers. Low, almost too soft to hear, like a conversation happening just beyond reach. The first time she mentioned it at breakfast, the family fell silent. Herr Meyer cleared his throat and changed the subject. Frau Meyer smiled tightly. Old houses make strange noises, she said. That was the end of the discussion. Rachel tried to ignore it, but the sounds continued, night after night. One evening, long after the family had gone to bed, she found herself staring down the hallway, unable to shake the feeling that something was waiting on the other side of that door. Curiosity won. She crept forward, bare feet silent against the wooden floor, until she was close enough to touch the brass handle. She hesitated, then pressed her ear to the door. Breathing, slow, shallow, right on the other side. She jerked back, a cold shiver crawling down her spine. Then, the handle rattled, hard. She stumbled backward, heart pounding, as if whatever was inside had sensed her, wanted out. Rachel spun on her heel and ran to her room, slamming the door shut and locking it. She barely slept that night, every muscle tense, waiting to hear footsteps outside her door. Morning came. At breakfast, Frau Meyer poured her tea as usual, but something in her expression was different. I hope you slept well, she said, her voice light. Too light. Rachel hesitated. You didn't hear anything unusual, did you? The way she asked it, casual, almost playful, made Rachel's skin crawl. She forced a smile and shook her head. Number nothing. Frau Meyer held her gaze for a moment longer before nodding, satisfied. Rachel kept to herself after that, did her job, followed the rule. But every night, she still heard it, the scratching, the whispers, and every morning when she walked down the hallway, she noticed something else. The locked door was open, just a little more than the night before. By the time her contract ended, the gap was wide enough to see inside. But she never looked. She packed her bags and left without saying goodbye. As the taxi pulled away, she dared one last glance at the house. From the upstairs window behind the glass, someone was watching. Someone she had never seen before. Maria had always loved the idea of New York, the energy, the lights, the way the city never truly slept. But the reality was different. She wasn't living in a high-rise or a cozy brownstone. She was in an ultra-modern house in the suburbs, miles away from the city's noise. The home was sleek and cold, full of towering glass windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, beautiful during the day. But at night, those windows became something else. Black mirrors. Maria was a live-in nanny for a wealthy family, taking care of their 5-year-old daughter, Ella. The parents were busy people, rarely home before midnight, so the house often felt too large, too empty. One evening, after putting Ella to bed, Maria curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone. The house was silent, save for the occasional hum of the fridge or the faint creak of the floor settling. Then she saw it. A reflection in the window. A man, standing outside in the dark, staring in. Her breath caught in her throat. She spun around. Nothing. The porch was empty. The street beyond was silent, untouched by movement. Heart hammering, she turned back to the glass. He was still there, his face unchanged, his lips stretched into a wide, unnatural smile. Maria scrambled to her feet, knocking over her phone. She flicked on the porch light. In that instant, his reflection vanished. But outside, nothing. No man, no footprints in the freshly fallen snow. Her skin prickled. Telling herself it was a trick of the light, exhaustion, her mind playing games, she forced herself upstairs to check on Ella. The little girl was sitting up in bed, eyes fixed on the window. Maria's stomach clenched. "Ella?" she whispered. The child turned her head slowly, her voice barely above a breath. "Don't open the window." Maria's body turned to ice. She followed Ella's gaze, her hands shaking as she reached for the curtain, barely daring to peek. The window was already open. The cold night air seeped in, the latch dangled loosely as if something had lifted it from the outside. Maria slammed the window shut, locking it tight. She didn't sleep that night, neither did Ella. The next morning, she told the parents. They listened, exchanged uneasy glances, then assured her it was nothing. "Maybe a dream," the father suggested. "Maybe stress," the mother added. But that night, as Maria tucked Ella into bed, the girl looked up at her, eyes dark with something beyond her years. "He likes to watch." Maria quit the next day. She never looked back. But sometimes, when she passed by glass windows at night, she swore she could see him, still smiling, still watching. Tomas had worked for many families before, but the Martin household felt wrong. It wasn't the people. Jonathan and Elaine were polite. Their children, Sophie and Oliver, were sweet. But the house, it was always too cold, too still. And then there was the basement door. It was always locked. White painted wood, slightly warped, as if straining against something on the other side. Tomas didn't ask at first, but the way everyone avoided it made his skin crawl. One night at dinner, he finally brought it up. "Why is the basement always locked?" Jonathan barely looked up. "Storage," he said. Elaine forced a smile. "Best left alone." That night, Tomas lay in bed, listening to the silence. Then, thud, a dull, heavy sound from below. He sat up, probably boxes shifting, right? But then, thud, scrape, a soft, shuffling sound. Tomas swallowed hard. He wasn't alone. The next evening, after putting the children to bed, he heard it again. This time, the basement handle rattled, his breath caught. Was someone inside? Then a voice, muffled, weak. "Please, help me." A chill rushed through him. He wasn't imagining it. Someone was down there, footsteps, small ones. Tomas turned to see Sophie and Oliver standing at the top of the stairs, wide-eyed, terrified. "Don't open it," Sophie whispered. "It tricks you." Before he could speak, the door shuddered violently. The whispering grew frantic. "Please, it's so dark. Let me out." Tomas grabbed the kids and ran upstairs, locking the bedroom door. He called the parents, hands shaking. They arrived within minutes, but instead of fear, they just looked annoyed. Jonathan sighed. "We told you not to listen at night." Before Tomas could protest, Jonathan unlocked the door and swung it open. The basement was pitch black, the kind of dark that felt hungry. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, a whisper. So close. "Help me." Jonathan shut the door, locked it. "It's taken care of," Elaine said. "Go to bed." Tomas didn't. He packed his bags and left that night. He never found out what was in that basement. But sometimes in the dead of night, he still hears knocking. Not every home is a safe place. And not every family is what they seem. So if you ever take a job as an au pair, make sure you're the only one watching the children. Because something or someone might be watching you too. If you enjoyed these unsettling stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more terrifying true tales. And if you have a chilling experience of your own, share it in the comments. We might feature it in a future video. Until next time, stay safe.